Breaking news coming this hour, a Pakistani vessel has been intercepted by the Coast Guard in Porbandar. The Coast Guard chased the suspicious Pakistani fishing vessel off the coast of Porbandar before the suspicious vessel blew itself up. The incident reportedly took place on the 31st of December and is now being reported in the media. Let's get an word from our editor, Strategic Affairs, Gaurav Sawant, who's with us live from our newsroom. Gaurav, this is how are security agencies in India viewing this? Is this being seen as a terror attack?
Well, this could well have been, this was an intelligence alert. There was a specific intelligence alert, and based on that intelligence alert, an operation was mounted. This boat had left the Keti Bandar in Karachi, and right from the time that it left the Bandar, the Keti Bandar in Karachi, this boat was under surveillance, and somewhere, 365 nautical miles off Porbandar, an effort was made to intercept this boat. As soon as the Coast Guard reached this boat, the boat turned around and suddenly started to flee towards Karachi. There was a chase for almost an hour. Before that, Dornier aircraft of the Coast Guard and the Indian Navy were engaged in an operation to hunt for this boat. Despite repeated warnings, when this boat did not stop, a warning shot was fired, and then apparently there was a crew of 4 on board. The crew of 4 on board set the boat on fire. They tried to hide or escape under the cover of darkness. This incident took place on the night intervening 31st and 1st, and that is where the boat blew up and sank at that very spot. So it is still not known whether there were terrorists on board. Did they have that is not known, but the boat was set on fire and it sank after a 1-hour-long chase by the Coast Guard, Simi.
Right, and Gaurav, this is something that security agencies will be very closely studying at this point. Remember, the 26/11 attack also had terrorists entering Indian territory on a fishing vessel.
In fact, that is why the Coast Guard were on a state of high alert. My sources in the Coast Guard telling me that there was specific intelligence that had come in, and there was an intelligence alert which was not just from domestic sources but also from international sources. What becomes extremely critical on the 26th of January, the US President Barack Obama is the chief guest on Republic Day parade. There is a heightened terror alert. Suspected terrorists have been nabbed in Noida just this morning. What is also clear that this particular intelligence was actionable. The Coast Guard and the Navy knew the name of the boat. They knew where it is coming, and that is why off the Porbandar coast and some 365 nautical miles off the coast of Porbandar, this boat was intercepted. As soon as an effort was made to board this boat, it tried to flee. There was a 1-hour-long chase, and after that warning shots were fired. Once the warning shots were fired, the boat still did not stop, and that is when what sources in Coast Guard are telling us that the crew set the boat on fire and it sank, Simi.
Right, so Gaurav, you're telling us this was the Pakistani shipping vessel that entered Indian territory, came close to the Porbandar port. What's the kind of surveillance that we see around the Porbandar port usually, and how frequently do Pakistani fishing vessels slip into Indian territorial waters in this region?
You know, the territorial waters are vast. India has a huge coastline of 7,000 kilometers, and monitoring every inch is not possible, and that is why intelligence alert become extremely important. And in this particular case, Simi, there was a specific intelligence alert about the timing when this boat is leaving Karachi. It was being monitored. In fact, a Dornier aircraft, it is a maritime reconnaissance aircraft, a medium-range maritime reconnaissance aircraft, short to medium range, and this aircraft, when it spotted this boat, the Pakistani shipping vessel, it alerted the Coast Guard. A ship was dispatched immediately. There were other ships in these waters. They tried to intercept this Pakistani vessel and they chased it. This was an hour-long late night chase. On the loudhailer, an effort was made to stop it. On the wireless, an effort was made to stop it. Warning shots were fired to get this ship to stop. When it still did not stop, that's the time that warning shots were fired. And what sources are telling us us, there were apparently, this is still not confirmed, this is source-based information, there were apparently 4 people who were sighted on the deck of this fishing vessel. There could have been more, but at least 4 were sighted, and all 4 hid themselves and while this boat was making an effort to flee, and then the boat caught fire and it sank. That's the information that Coast Guard is sharing as of now, Simi.
Right, Gaurav, you're giving us specific inputs. You're telling us that the Coast Guard had information about when this vessel would be leaving Karachi, at what point of time it would be nearing the Porbandar coast. They had a specific intelligence input to suggest that there was something fishy going on here. Can you explain to us, can you give us a few more details about this particular vessel? Was it a modern fishing trawler, considering that you're saying that the 4 people who were spotted on the deck, or was it an old poor man's fishing vessel?
If I read out what the Coast Guard is now putting out, it says, and I am quoting the Coast Guard here, it says an intelligence-based midnight operation was conducted on the night intervening December 31 and January 1 by the Indian Coast Guard ships and aircraft to intercept a suspect fishing vessel in the Arabian Sea near the Indo-Pak maritime boundary, approximately 365 kilometers from Porbandar. As per the intelligence inputs received on the 31st of December, a fishing boat from Keti Bandar near Karachi, so this left the Keti port in Karachi, was planning some illicit transaction in the Arabian Sea. Based on this input, a Coast Guard Dornier aircraft undertook sea and air coordinated search operation and located the suspect fishing boat. Thereafter, a Coast Guard patrol ship was diverted to intercept this unlit boat at the midnight of December 31, some 365 kilometers southwest of Porbandar. The Coast Guard ship warned the fishing boat to stop for further investigation of the crew and cargo. However, the fishing boat increased its speed and tried to escape away from the Indian side of the maritime boundary. The hot pursuit continued for nearly 1 hour, and the Coast Guard ship managed to stop the fishing boat after firing warning shots. 4 persons were seen on the boat who disregarded all warning by the Coast Guard ship to stop and cooperate with the investigation. Soon thereafter, the crew hid themselves in the below deck compartment and set the boat on fire, which resulted in the explosion and a major fire on board. Due to darkness, bad weather and strong winds, the boat and persons on board could not be saved or recovered. The boat burnt and sank at the same position in the early hours of January 1. Coast Guard ships and aircraft are continuing operations in the area to search for any possible survivors. Coast Guard and other security agencies are maintaining a high vigil in maritime and coastal areas since last couple of months due to several inputs on threat from the sea. So the Coast Guard now giving a clear picture of what happened, Simi, on the night intervening December 31 and January 1, 2015.
Absolutely. Gaurav, stay on with us. Thanks for taking us through crucial details of this story that is now emerging. The incident reportedly took place on the intervening night between the 31st of December and the 1st of January, where a Pakistani fishing vessel entered Indian territorial waters and approached close to the Porbandar port. Let's also get a word from our Deputy Editor Shiv Arur, who's with us on the phone line. Shiv, what more details can you add for us?
Simi, the information that we have is that the explosion that took place, like Gaurav just pointed out, it was such a big explosion that it is virtually certain that there was some kind of explosive material on board that on board that particular vessel. It wasn't just a fuel explosion, which is something that the Coast Guard and investigators are pretty clear about. Now, this leaves only 2 possibilities. Either the ship, the fishing vessel, was carrying terrorists with it, or it was a logistical vessel that was transporting illicit material, most likely explosives, to the coast of Kutch in Gujarat. Either way, this is, it's fairly clear that there appears to have been some kind of an anti-India link. The fact that the ship emanated from the Keti Bandar area is not unusual. Fishing boats have been spotted many times before, between Gujarat and Pakistan. Fishermen have been arrested. The difference here is it took place at night. Fishing boats never venture out so late in the night, obviously, because they can't do anything at that time of the night. Point number 2. there are very clear protocols, Simi, as Gaurav also mentioned, about how fishing boats are expected to respond in case they get lost or they're sent out to sea. So the manner in which this particular boat responded immediately alerted the Coast Guard about the possibility of something illicit taking place, possibly linked to terror. The fact that the ship tried to actually get away and then set itself on fire obviously means an attempt to destroy evidence. The official press release from the government says that 4 people were sighted on board that ship, and they all went into a below-deck bunker and set the ship on fire. So, forensic investigations will be difficult because the entire ship actually blew up, and then all of it sank. There's very little material evidence that the Indian investigators and the Coast Guard have at this point of time to precisely pinpoint what the cargo on board was. What they do have is circumstantial evidence from the explosion that actually took place, and they will be trying to arrive at precisely what the cargo was on that ship and who the people were, the 4 people or more who were on that ship, whether they were terrorists, whether they were logistical, support sort of crew of a ship who'd been hired by Pakistan or by terrorists or by both to transport explosives to the Kutch coast.
Right, so Shiv, you're basically telling us that prima facie it appears that the ship could have been carrying explosives, considering that the explosion that was set off by the 4 people on board was massive, suggesting that there was some amount of ammunition on board. Can you give us some details about where exactly this explosion took place, and was it possible for those 4 people who were on board to swim across to the shores in Karachi?
It appears unlikely at this time because remember that the Coast Guard vessel was in sight. It was within reach of that ship when the explosion actually occurred. So the crew of the Coast Guard ship that actually chased this vessel were able to visually sight the explosion. What they couldn't do was pick up any material evidence of what the material was on board that ship that led to this explosion. What they have been able to guarantee is that the ship was first set on fire and then the explosion occurred. So obviously there appears to have been a deliberate attempt to conceal, the nature of the cargo on board that vessel. The surrounding circumstances leave it open to the possibility that the people on board that ship either perished in the explosion or they couldn't have survived. Even if they did survive the explosion, it's unlikely that they survived later because they were too far from shore, both from Porbandar and Karachi at that point of time. It was very late in the night. It's very cold as well, so it's highly unlikely. Be that as it may seem, it's a good question that you ask because the Coast Guard and the Indian Navy, both through ship and through aerial surveillance aircraft, like Gaurav was mentioning, are continuing to survey that area, for any possible survivors. Because remember, in the past, during 26/11, during other attempts that have been made, people emanating from that country who are attempting to get into India, either as terrorists or as logistics crew, have come very well prepared. So it is not inconceivable, that this kind of scenario wasn't imagined or envisaged by planners sitting in Pakistan. So at this point of time, the immediate focus of the Coast Guard is a cleansing operation to make sure that there are no other people who survived, and if anybody has survived, to actually bring them back to Karachi. It's also, remember, it's ironically a rescue operation in case there are any injured people from that explosion. But point number 2 is to figure out what that cargo was, what the intentions of that ship really were, what were they trying to land on India's coast. Is it linked to anything else that has been happening within Gujarat or anywhere else in the rest of the country? Are there any other intelligence inputs, and Gaurav will corroborate this, are any other intelligence inputs that tie up with what is happening, off the coast of Porbandar? All of these very, very complicated follow-up operations that will take place today.
Absolutely. Shiv, stay on with us. Let's get Gaurav into this discussion at this point. Gaurav, investigations are on to figure out whether there have been any survivors in this in the explosion. Of course, a clear and deliberate attempt being made to conceal the cargo on board. I want to ask you, considering that we know that this was a Pakistani vessel that the Coast Guard had intercepted, will the Indian government take it up with Pakistan?
Well, at this stage, clearly there are no survivors. 4 people were seen on board. The boat sank exactly where it caught fire. There are Indian Navy and Coast Guard ships in those waters for the past 24 hours. And so far, there are absolutely no survivors. As far as this incident is concerned, from what my sources tell me, the intelligence was very specific about a suspicious boat. Now, was this carrying narcotics? Was these carrying terrorists? Was these carrying weapons, we are still not sure. But there was an illegal transaction that was to take place on the high seas, and this is against the laws of seas. No boat can be unlit on the high seas. Then there are laws of the seas that very clearly say once a boat is ordered to stop, it has to immediately comply, and especially when a law enforcing agency is telling it to stop. In this particular case, this boat just did not stop at all. In fact, if you look at this paper that the Coast Guard has just released, they very clearly say that initially the boat was asked to stop, then the boat was told then they were told warning shots were fired. After that, they speeded up once again. So after that, the Coast Guard was left with no alternative but to fire a warning shot. And then the 4 on board went below deck, and suddenly there was a massive explosion. So we don't know if this was some kind of a suicide squad, whether these were terrorists, whether these were people who were coming in for yet another repeat of a 26/11. All of that is still not known. Perhaps there will be more clarity later in the evening.
Absolutely. Gaurav, stay on with us. We also have with us Jugal Purohit, who's with us on the phone line for the national capital. Jugal, how is the Indian government responding to this incident? Is the Ministry of External Affairs likely to take it up with the Pakistani government?
Well, Simi, that issue will of course come in, and there is no doubt about that. It's in fact a part of the procedure. But what we understand, and I have spoken to people who have had access to the intelligence warnings which were given, which actually led to this action and the culmination on the morning in fact the early hours of the 1st of January, which is when Pakistan was even firing at our posts along the border in the international border area of the Jammu area. What we understand, Simi, is that there was a specific intelligence input about this suspicious vessel coming in. It had suspicious personnel on board who had to be sort of deboarded from that particular point. Now its destination for now is not well known, but it did carry a suspicious amount of personnel on board, and the Coast Guard was accordingly tipped off. Aerial surveillance was maintained, and obviously also surface surveillance through Coast Guard ships was maintained. Now what I understand is that this ship actually crossed what is called as the International Maritime Boundary Line, IMBL, and around at that point itself it was challenged. This was around close to 10 p.m. on the 31st of December. After this point, the boat kept on moving. It was tailed by the Indian Coast Guard vessel, and approximately 10 nautical miles inside. And all this while, Simi, we are given to understand that attempts were made to deter, to stop this particular boat, to ensure that the crew listens to the Coast Guard. Of course, that did not take place. This boat kept on traveling inside what can be understood as Indian waters, though technically they're not Indian waters, but still they crossed the maritime boundary. And around 10 nautical miles inside towards India is when the Coast Guard finally intercepted, fired a few warning shots, and then after, as we understand, the 5 personnel who were on board went under and a fire erupted, and after that the boat has sunk. There is no trace whatsoever of any remaining material on board, so we do not know just what the mission was. But yes, there was intelligence. This boat came. They also acted in a pattern which would obviously arouse and further strengthen suspicion. So that's what's happened till now. It's an extremely serious incident which has taken place on an otherwise quiet maritime boundary line for the last 3-4 years. There's never been an attempt of this type. In fact, several attempts which have been made have been nipped very much in the area. In fact, some stray cases of fishermen also venturing off from Pakistani waters to Indian have also been nipped and arrested. But this incident coming at a time when India is extremely sensitive, at a time when India's agencies are aware, and at a time when there is intelligence available, is obviously an extremely serious one, Simi.
Absolutely, Gaurav and Jugal, stay on with us for the benefit of our viewers who just switched on their TV sets. The big story that we're tracking this hour: a Pakistani boat reportedly entered the Indian waters, crossed the international maritime boundary line, and was spotted by the Coast Guard almost 350 kilometers from Porbandar. When the Coast Guard asked the trawler to wait, or asked for it to respond, it started retreating towards Karachi. the Coast Guard was forced to fire warning shots. The fishing boat didn't. Important points to be noted at this point is that fishing boats don't usually venture out at night. This is also a boat that, as Gaurav was pointing out, did not have any lights on it. The boat also reportedly did not respond to Coast Guard warnings, and there was a clear and deliberate attempt to conceal the cargo on board. After the warning shots were fired, the 4 people who were reportedly spotted on board went inside the boat and set it ablaze. Gaurav Sawant, our strategic affairs editor, is also with us live from our newsroom. I'll come to Gaurav in a bit, but I want to come to you first, Jugal. We've been speaking to Gaurav and Shiv, who've been taking us through the kind of what really happened, what really transpired in the night of the 31st of December when this incident took place. And as Shiv was pointing out, the Coast Guard claims that the explosion that happened when those 4 people set the boat on fire was massive, to suggest that it was perhaps carrying some kind of explosives.
Well, Simi, there are 3 points that we need to understand, make our viewers understand. Firstly, is that it's an area which is extremely sensitive. Second, there is a specific intelligence which is available with the maritime agencies of a boat attempting an intrusion. Thirdly, that this intelligence contains within itself a warning that personnel are going to be transported from the Pakistani side onto the Indian coast. Now, keeping all of this in mind, there was obviously a heightened presence, which is when this particular boat came in through the international maritime boundary line. It was spotted by the aircraft, it was tailed by the Coast Guard ship out there, and then subsequently it was challenged. Now 10 nautical miles away, inside in fact of the Indian waters, so to speak, is when the Coast Guard actually intercepted and ordered it to stop. Now, of course, the Defence Ministry's statement suggests that the personnel on board actually went under, and then a fire was initiated, and of course it caused, you know, the boat to actually sink. Now, for now, we do not know the size of the boat. For now, we do not know the cargo inside. But, you know, if you are to add these 3 or 4 factors that I listed out together, it gives you a very, very clear picture that there was something extremely nefarious about this boat, or else there was no reason for this boat to behave in a manner in which it did. Now, let me also tell you, Simi, for our viewers' understanding, that, you know, very often we've seen cases of Pakistani fishermen starting out either at Karachi or some other area of Sindh, and then, you know, ending up very close to the Gulf, very close to the waters of Gujarat. Many a times these boats are apprehended by the Indian Coast Guard, and, you know, they actually adhere to the procedure. They are arrested, and then everything else happens. Nobody till now has not, you know, adhered to what the authorities have asked them to do, and tried to act in a manner in which the personnel on board this particular vessel did. And that's a clear enough proof, Simi, that there was something nefarious about this boat, which is why it did not act in a manner that it should have, and in a manner in which several other Pakistani innocent fishermen have acted. Simi?
All right. Jugal, stay on with us. We're also being joined by strategic expert Sushant Sareen. Thanks so much for speaking to Headlines today, Mr. Sareen. How do you see these developments? 4 persons on a Pakistani fishing vessel crossed the international maritime boundary line, 10 nautical miles into what is being seen as Indian territorial waters, don't respond to the Coast Guard's warnings, and then set the boat on fire.
Look, from the reports which are coming out right now, and these are very sketchy reports, anything is really possible. It could be that they were just bona fide fishermen who panicked and then they burned the vessel. But normally fishermen don't do something like this because that means losing the boat and perhaps even losing their lives. The only people who are ready to lose their lives rather than risk imprisonment in India for a few months are guys who are desperate enough, or desperados of the terrorist variety, who are willing to lay down their lives in whatever sorry cause they believe in, which is what happened at the time of 26/11. So while the reports are very sketchy, the fact that some of the reports suggest that this vessel had people who had weapons with them means that even if they were not terrorists, they were criminals, because no vessel like this is allowed to carry weapons. No fisherman is allowed to carry weapons, even to the high seas.
Right, and Mr. Sareen, also important to note at this stage is that no fishing boats really venture out in the dark. Also, fishing boats, as far as I know, are supposed to carry some kind of light with them so they can be identified from a distance. This particular boat, A, was out at about 10:30 at night and did not respond to any kind of warnings from the Coast Guard, and also didn't have any lighting to show its exact location.
Well, some of these procedural things could be overlooked simply because, that's the kind of societies we live in. We don't follow these rules and regulations very, very strictly. I won't see too much into that at this point in time. Perhaps all of that will become material to this entire case after a little more reports come out and the facts surrounding this entire episode comes out. But the fact of the matter that these guys burned their boat or blew it up, either they wanted to hide some evidence or they didn't want to be caught because they were afraid that of what they might end up revealing, a la Ajmal Kasab. The thing is that if these guys were indeed terrorists, then this is an extremely serious development, and this is a wake-up call for Indian authorities because, as we know, the kind of things we had set in place, the kind of SOPs we put in place after 26/11 seem to be observed more in their flouting rather than in their implementation. And that is going to be a problem, and unless the government is able to tighten the screws or bring the fishing community on board and make them adhere to all those procedures, it's very difficult to monitor the kind of fishing traffic which happens in this region. So number one, this is a wake-up call, partly from the point of view of procedures, but also with the continuing threats on the maritime front, which we would be I think it would be very cavalier of us to ignore them any longer.
Absolutely. And Mr. Sareen, would you see this as a series of aggressive attempts by Pakistan to provoke India? This is one incident that we're reporting as far as the sea line is concerned. What we're also seeing is a true build-up across the Samba sector. We've also been reporting on ceasefire violations by Pakistan around New Year's Eve.
As far as the Samba troop build-up is concerned, I think the army has come out with a statement saying that there's nothing unusual about the troop movement. I don't think the Pakistanis will be stupid enough to try any kind of an adventurism in this region, because I don't think it is in the interest of either of the two countries to escalate beyond a point. The Pakistanis initiated something, the Indians retaliated, and that's an action-reaction cycle. But to take it to the next level, if the Pakistanis want to risk that kind of an escalation, they're welcome to try it out. But I don't think if they're serious about fighting this war on terror on their western border, I don't think they would like to really heat up the eastern border just yet. That does not mean that they will not continue to try and probe into India's defenses or try and make some kind of a breach in India's defenses, whether on the maritime front or on the land frontier. I think that will continue, but to escalate it to the next level, I won't credit Pakistanis with that much stupidity also.
All right, Mr. Sushant Sareen, thanks so much for speaking to Headlines today. This is the big story we're tracking this hour, a midnight chase of a Pakistani fishing vessel on the 31st of December, which eventually blows itself up rather after it is intercepted by the Coast Guard. We'll continue to track and develop.